The sky above Fairfield was the color of dull steel, the kind that made the sea and the clouds blend into one gray mass. A cold drizzle fell over the small coastal town, tracing crooked lines across fog bus windows and tin rooftops. Inside a narrow apartment on the east side, a single bulb flickered weakly above a chipped table. Megan Carter sat beneath it, her hands wrapped around a cracked mug of cold tea. The room smelled faintly of damp plaster and instant noodles. She was 18, barely an adult, but life had aged her faster than the seasons ever could. Her mother had passed away 6 months earlier, leaving behind a few worn photographs, an old blanket, and a debt she could never repay. Megan had sold her mother's sewing machine, then the little jewelry box she used to keep under the bed. Now there was nothing left to sell, and even the landlady's patience was wearing thin. "Next week, Megan," the woman had said, standing at the door with crossed arms. "No rent, no room." The girl had nodded, too tired to argue. Each night, she made a ritual out of survival, boiling cheap noodles, counting coins, and reading the classifieds printed on thin gray paper that left ink smudges on her fingers. She'd circle any ad that didn't require experience or references. 2 things she didn't have. Cafe, help wanted. Called, already taken. Housekeeping. Part-time. Called, must be over 21. Receptionist. Called. Requires a high school diploma she'd never earned. By late afternoon, her voice was hoarse from rejection. The rain outside deepened, tapping the window like impatient fingers. She was about to give up when her eyes caught a small black box near the bottom of the page. Caregiver needed for home patient. No medical degree required. Meals and room provided. Her heart skipped. It sounded too good to be real, the kind of ad people warned you about. But desperation had long silenced her doubts. She reached for her old phone. Its screen cracked diagonally and dialed the number. A woman answered. Her tone was crisp, almost rehearsed. "Mrs. Hayes speaking." Megan hesitated, then found her voice. "Hi, I'm calling about the caregiver position." A short pause. The woman exhaled softly, as though bored already. "Can you start soon?" If I'm accepted, yes. As soon as possible. Come tomorrow morning. 10 a.m. The address is 72 Ocean View Road." Before Megan could thank her, the line went dead. She stared at the phone, her pulse racing. The ad hadn't asked for experience, references, or even age. That alone felt like a miracle. She folded the newspaper carefully, as if the inked page itself were fragile hope, and packed her small canvas bag, 1 change of clothes, a comb, and the last photograph of her mother, Anna. Her mother's smile was faint, faded at the edges, but it reminded her that kindness still existed somewhere in the world. When the morning bus rolled into Fairfield Station, Megan stood in the drizzle, clutching her bag. The driver glanced at her coins and sighed. "That's short by 50 cents. Kid." She blinked, fumbling in her pockets, nothing. After a moment, the man waved her in anyway. "Go on. It's too damn cold out there." She whispered a thank you and found a seat by the window. The bus pulled away, passing rows of gray houses, rusted mailboxes, and lonely trees stripped bare by autumn. As it neared the coast, the fog thinned, revealing the faint outline of ocean waves, and, in the distance, a hill crowned by a sprawling white mansion. That was 72 Ocean View Road, the place she was headed. She pressed her forehead to the cold glass, watching the mansion grow larger with every turn. Her reflection stared back, pale, thin, but alive. Somewhere beneath the weariness, a fragile flicker stirred inside her. Maybe, just maybe, this was the chance her mother always told her would come, if she could hold on long enough to see it. Ocean View Road curved along the bluff like a ribbon, and at the very end of it stood the Hayes property. The house wasn't just big, it was confident, Wide glass walls faced the Atlantic. Pale stone columns framed a balcony that ran the length of the second floor, and two sculpted copper herons stood by the entrance like silent guards. The rain had softened to mist, hanging over everything in a gray veil. Megan stepped through the open iron gate and felt, for a moment, like she didn't belong to the same world as the people who lived here. The front drive was larger than the parking lot of the diner she'd once worked at. A single, sleek, black SUV sat near the steps. To the left stretched a patch of flawless green, a private putting green with 3 flags and perfectly trimmed edges. On the other side, behind a line of glass railings, a pale blue rectangle caught the weak light. An outdoor pool. In late October, she couldn't begin to imagine what it cost to keep warm. Even the walkway under her shoes felt expensive. White stone, polished smooth, laid in clean geometric lines, leading her straight to a double front door of dark wood and frosted glass. She caught herself smoothing her jacket, an old, thrifted windbreaker, too thin for the weather, and wiping her shoes on the mat so she wouldn't track rain in. Before she could knock, the door opened. The woman standing there looked like she had stepped out of a magazine spread. She was maybe mid-30s tall, with perfect posture and the kind of stillness that made other people fidget. Her hair was chestnut and glossy, pulled back in a clean twist that showed off diamond studs at her ears. Her blouse was silk. Her nails were pale, deliberate, expensive. The only warm thing about her was the color of her lipstick. Everything else felt cold. "You're Megan," the woman said, not as a question. "Yes," Megan answered quietly. "Are you Mrs. Hayes?" A small smile, more like a polite cut than a welcome. "Vivian will do." Vivian's eyes moved, forehead, hair, jacket. Shoes in one practice sweep, and Megan felt it like an X-ray. She straightened her shoulders without meaning to. "How old are you?" Vivian asked. 18. Ever worked in private care before? No, but I can. Are you willing to do basic physical assistance? Lifting, bathing, feeding if necessary? Yes. You steal? The question landed so fast and flat that Megan blinked. No, good, Vivian said, already turning. You'll start tomorrow. 7 a.m. Not a minute later. I don't tolerate lateness. Just like that. No papers. No ID check. No references. Megan's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her throat. Vivian moved through the house without looking back, expecting to be followed. Megan stepped inside. The air changed the instant the door closed. Outside had been salt wind and damp cold. Inside was temperature-controlled silence. White walls. Low. Expensive furniture in shades of cream and slate. Framed modern art, the kind you pretend to understand. Everything smelled faintly of eucalyptus and something sterile, like a private clinic. His room is down here, Vivian said. They passed a wide living area with glass doors looking out over the water, even in the gray light. The view was almost unreal, pale waves rolling in slow, heavy beats, hitting the rocks below the bluff. From somewhere in the house came the steady mechanical hum of filtration pumps keeping the pool warm. It was all beautiful and somehow deeply lonely. Vivian stopped at a door and opened it without knocking. The first thing Megan noticed was the quiet. The second was the man in the wheelchair. He sat near the window, angled slightly toward the ocean. His hair had gone salt and pepper early, more silver than brown now. There was strength in his jawline, and something educated in the way he held himself, even sitting. But his shoulders were tired. His hands rested motionless in his lap. His eyes were open, but not focused on anything in the room, not even on them. "William," Vivian said, almost casually, like she was announcing groceries. "This is Megan. She'll be helping during the day. I told you we were hiring someone." No answer. Vivian's smile didn't flicker. She leaned closer to Megan, voice smooth. "You'll handle the basics. Meals. Hygiene. Keeping him comfortable. He can speak, obviously, but lately he chooses not to. Then, with a softness that wasn't softness at all, she added, he was a cardiovascular surgeon. Yale Medical Center. Brilliant once. Something twisted in Megan's chest. Brilliant once. Vivian's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, then stepped back toward the hall. 7 a.m. tomorrow. Don't be late. And then she was gone. For a long moment, Megan stood near the door, unsure if she was allowed to move. Wind pushed against the glass. She could hear the ocean now, dull and constant, like a slow heartbeat under the floor. Finally, she took one small step closer. "Mr. Hayes," she said softly. His eyes shifted, just a fraction, just enough to let her know he'd heard her. That was how they met, not with warmth or welcome or even words. Just the cold Atlantic air sneaking through the frame of a window, the distant crash of waves below the bluff, and a girl who had nothing left, standing in a house that had everything. The next morning, the house woke before the sun. The ocean outside was still the color of pewter, the waves moving slow and heavy under a pale dawn. Megan stood in the kitchen, trying to move quietly even though there was no one to disturb. She found the list Vivian had left on the marble counter. Everything in clean, cursive handwriting. Breakfast at 8, medication at 9, light reading after lunch. No notes about kindness or conversation. Just a schedule, cold and exact. She boiled water, made oatmeal, and placed it carefully on a tray beside a cup of tea, chamomile, unsweetened, the way Vivian had specified. The scent of the tea filled the air, gentle and calming, but the house stayed silent, listening. When she entered William Hayes's room, he was already awake. The morning light from the sea fell across him, outlining the sharp edges of his face. He wore a gray sweater over a white shirt, sleeves perfectly folded, as though someone had once taught him the kind of discipline that doesn't fade, even when everything else does. "Good morning," she said softly. He looked up. His eyes were clear, deep blue, steady, but distant, as if they were seeing through her or past her. "Morning," he replied after a pause. His voice was calm, level, professional, the kind that had probably once made entire surgical teams fall silent when he spoke. She placed the tray on his table, adjusted the cup handle so it faced his right hand, then quietly opened the curtains. The ocean stretched beyond the glass like a living thing, gray, endless, and somehow lonelier than before. "Would you like me to read something later?" she asked. He hesitated, then nodded once. "There's a book on the shelf. Second row. Blue spine." She found it easily, a worn copy of The Old Man and the Sea. The edges were soft, the cover faded from years of use. As she began to read aloud, her voice small but steady, William closed his eyes. For the first time since she had met him, his shoulders seemed to relax. Hours passed quietly. By noon, she'd learned the rhythm of the house. When the sunlight hit the stairs, when the cleaning service came, when the tide changed. What she didn't hear, not once, was the sound of Vivian Hayes. Vivian's absence became a pattern. Each morning, her car was gone from the driveway. Each evening, she returned late, sometimes smelling of expensive perfume and champagne. One night, as Megan was cleaning the kitchen, laughter echoed through the corridor. It wasn't Vivian's alone. There was a man's voice, low and playful, and the unmistakable sound of heels clicking against marble. Megan froze by the sink, heart pounding. She could hear them pass the hallway outside William's room, could hear Vivian's laugh rise and fall like music that didn't belong in a house that carried this much sorrow. The door to the guest room shut, muffled by distance. Inside William's room, the silence grew heavy again. He had turned his wheelchair toward the window, his face faintly illuminated by the moonlight spilling in. Megan lingered by the doorway, unsure if he knew. But then she saw the way his fingers gripped the armrest, tightly, knuckles white, and the way his jaw clenched before he spoke. "Go to bed." "Miss Carter," he said quietly, "you'll need rest in the morning." His tone was polite, but it carried something else, a weight she couldn't name. She nodded, retreating without another word. That night, long after she lay down in the small guest room, Megan stared at the ceiling and listened to the faint, distant music of laughter through the walls. And somewhere beneath that, softer, almost buried, the steady hum of the sea. It was then she understood. William Hayes wasn't just a patient bound to a wheelchair. He was a man imprisoned by walls made of glass, silence, and someone else's cruelty. And no matter how much he tried to hide it, she could feel the loneliness pressing through the air, as real and cold as the wind from the Atlantic. The air smelled of sun-warmed leaves and damp earth, one of those fragile New England afternoons when the world pretends to be calm. By noon the fog had lifted from Fairfield Harbor, and sunlight filtered through branches that shimmered with the last gold of autumn. Megan pushed Dr. Hayes's wheelchair along the path that circled Lake Cranberry. The gravel crunched underfoot, the air crisp and cool. She had hoped the change of scenery might lighten the silence that had wrapped around him since morning. Vivian had returned home the previous night, long after midnight. Perfume. Laughter, the sound of a slammed door. There had been shouting, muffled at first, then sharp. Megan had heard a glass break and Vivian's voice cutting through the house like a blade. By the time the sun rose, she was gone again, leaving only the smell of expensive alcohol in the hall. William hadn't spoken a single word since. His breakfast sat untouched. When she asked if he wanted to go outside, he simply nodded, his eyes hollow. Now, as the wind stirred the reeds near the lake, he stared straight ahead, expressionless. "Would you like to stop here for a while?" Megan asked, parking the chair beneath a tree that leaned slightly over the water. "It's quiet. I'll grab us something to drink from the stand." He nodded again, the movement barely perceptible. Megan jogged toward the small kiosk at the edge of the park. The air was bright and cold in her lungs. She could see the vendor handing out bottles of water, hear children laughing somewhere behind her. When she turned back toward the lake, everything looked ordinary until it didn't. The wheelchair was moving. At first it was slow, rolling down the gentle incline toward the embankment. Then the wheels picked up speed. For half a second her brain refused to believe what she was seeing. Then instinct took over. "Dr. Hayes!" she screamed, the sound tearing out of her throat. The chair was already halfway down the slope, gravel spitting under the tires, heading straight toward the glimmering water. She dropped the bottles and ran, her shoes slipping on the wet grass. The distance between them felt endless. The wind caught her hair, blinded her, but she didn't stop. He didn't reach for the brakes. He didn't call out. He simply watched the water come closer, his face strangely peaceful. When she reached him, she lunged forward, grabbing the handles and twisting with all her strength. The chair tipped sideways, both of them crashing onto the muddy grass, just inches from the edge. The splash of the lake soaked her sleeves. Icy water stung her hands. For a moment, neither of them moved, the sound of her own heartbeat filling her ears. Then she heard him gasp, a raw, human sound that shattered the stillness. She pushed herself up, trembling. "You could have died," she cried, voice breaking. "What were you thinking?" He turned his face away, eyes squeezed shut. That was the point. Her breath caught. You tried to." "End it," he finished. "Yes." Anger and fear tangled inside her. "You can't just decide that. You have people who what?" His voice rose suddenly, echoing off the water. "Who need me? Who love me? Don't lie, Miss Carter. The only person who ever did is gone." The words hung there, heavy, final. He pressed his palms to his face, shaking. When he finally spoke again, the fury was gone, replaced by exhaustion. "I used to heal people. That's all I was. My hands were my life. And when they stopped working, so did I. Megan knelt beside him, mud clinging to her knees. "You're still here," she whispered. "That has to mean something." He lowered his hands, looking at her for the first time that day. His eyes were wet but steady. "You sound like someone I once knew," he said quietly. "Someone kind." Her name was Anna. Megan froze, the name striking something deep and familiar inside her, though she didn't yet know why. He continued, almost to himself. "She used to say that no one's beyond saving. Not even me." They sat there for a long time, side by side, soaked and shivering. The sun slipping behind the clouds again. The lake rippled gently before them, indifferent and endless. When Megan finally stood to help him back into the chair, neither spoke. But something had shifted. An invisible thread connecting two wounded lives had begun to pull taut, humming quietly beneath the surface of their silence. The rain returned that night, tapping softly against the tall windows of the Hayes mansion. The sound filled the long corridors with a steady rhythm, like a slow heartbeat pulsing through the dark. In William's room, only one lamp was lit, its light falling in a pale circle across the carpet and the edge of his wheelchair. Megan sat nearby in the armchair, wrapped in a blanket she'd found folded at the foot of the bed. She had insisted on staying until he was settled, but neither of them seemed ready to sleep. He hadn't said much since the lake. The silence between them wasn't empty, though. It was heavy, dense with everything that had almost been lost. After a long while, William spoke, his voice low and calm, as if he were confessing to the shadows rather than to her. "I was born into medicine," he began. "My father was a cardiologist. My mother a nurse. I grew up in the halls of hospitals, watching, listening, breathing that sterile air like it was home. They used to say I had steady hands, even as a child. By the time I was 10, I could thread a needle without trembling. By 28, I was performing my first open-heart surgery. It was all I ever wanted, or maybe all I ever knew." He paused, his eyes distant, fixed on some invisible scene from decades earlier. "That's where I met Vivian. Her father had been admitted after a stroke. She wasn't like the others who visited their sick parents. She walked into that ward as if she owned it. Beautiful, yes, but more than that, she was bold, unafraid. I was drawn to that." A faint smile crossed his lips, though it carried no warmth. "She challenged me, flirted shamelessly even when her father could hear her from the next bed. I thought it was confidence. Later I realized it was vanity. But at the time, I was tired of the loneliness that came with being the man everyone depended on. So when she wanted me, I let myself believe it was love." He rubbed his palms together, a ghost of an old habit from the days before surgery. "We married within 6 months. The wedding was lavish, her father's doing. He was a powerful man, the kind who could buy respect with a single phone call. For a while, I thought I'd made the right choice. Then the lies began to show. Vivian despised my work. She said I loved my patients more than her, that the hospital came first. Maybe she was right, but she wanted more attention, wealth, a life of constant admiration. I couldn't give her that." His eyes lowered to his lap. "The affairs began soon after. Everyone knew but me. By the time I learned, I was too exhausted to fight. I buried myself in surgeries, in other people's hearts because I couldn't mend my own." He drew a breath that trembled faintly before he continued. "Then, one day, a new nurse joined the cardiac team. Her name was Anna Carter." At that, Megan's fingers tightened around the edge of her blanket, though she said nothing. She wasn't like anyone I'd met. Gentle, quiet, with this way of making you feel seen even when you didn't want to be. She used to hum while she prepped instruments, an old melody I could never place. For the first time in years, I remembered what peace felt like. We worked side by side for months before I realized I was in love with her. His voice softened. "Anna made me want to be a better man. I left Vivian, told her it was over. I planned to start a new life, one built on something real. But her father didn't take humiliation lightly. Within days, Anna was called into administration. They accused her of mishandling medication. Something absurd, but enough to destroy her record. She was suspended, then disappeared. Her phone disconnected. Her apartment empty. I searched for weeks, even hired a private investigator. Nothing. It was as if she'd never existed. The rain outside grew heavier, streaking down the windows like tears. Vivian's father came to me after, William said quietly. He told me to come home, to forget her. He said I owed his daughter that much for shaming their family. And his voice cracked. I went back, not because I wanted to, but because I had nowhere else to go. I kept hoping Anna would find me again. She never did. He fell silent for a long time before adding, almost as an afterthought. A year later, Vivian and I argued during a drive back from her father's estate. She was drunk. I should have taken the keys. I didn't. The car flipped off the road. She walked away with a few bruises. I left the hospital in a wheelchair. Megan's eyes burned, but she didn't speak. William looked down at his useless hands. People call it an accident, he said softly, but I sometimes think it was punishment for loving too late and for letting the only good thing in my life disappear. The room fell quiet except for the rain. Somewhere in the darkness, a memory stirred in Megan's chest, of her mother's voice humming an old tune while folding laundry, the same melody William had just described. She turned toward him, slowly, heart pounding, but said nothing. Not yet. Outside, the waves crashed against the cliffs, relentless and unseen. Inside, two lives began to circle the truth. Closer with every heartbeat. The house had gone still for the night. Beyond the tall windows, the sea was only a black mirror, reflecting the faint glow of the moon. The rain had finally stopped, leaving behind the scent of wet stone and salt. In William's room, the lamplight softened the hard edges of everything, the bookshelves, the medical certificates framed on the wall, the motionless figure in the wheelchair. Megan sat across from him, her knees drawn up beneath her blanket, watching the shadows shift across the carpet. The story he had told her earlier lingered in the air between them, heavy and raw. For a long time, neither spoke. It was William who finally broke the silence. I told you too much, he murmured, eyes lowered. But I don't regret it. She hesitated, then said quietly, maybe it's my turn now. He looked up, and in the amber light his expression softened. Only if you want to. Megan nodded slowly, hands clasped around her mug of tea. My mother's name was Anna Carter, she began. She used to tell me that no matter how hard life gets, you can't let it take away your kindness. I didn't really understand what she meant until much later. Her voice trembled, but she kept going. We didn't have much. She worked long shifts at a clinic, never complained, never stopped smiling. Every night, she'd come home, wash her hands, and hum the same melody while making dinner. She said music kept her heart from turning bitter. William's breath caught almost imperceptibly at the name, but Megan didn't notice. When she got sick, Megan continued, I was 16. It happened fast, some infection that spread before anyone caught it. The clinic helped as much as they could, but they didn't have the equipment, and we didn't have the money. She passed away that winter. The words seemed to pull something from her, a quiet ache that had waited years to be spoken. After that, I had to move in with my stepfather. He'd been kind when Mom was alive, or at least pretended to be. But when she was gone, everything changed. He drank all the time, broke things, shouted at nothing. Sometimes he'd come into my room at night and just stand there, watching. Her hands tightened around the mug, knuckles white. One night he grabbed me. I ran before he could do anything worse. I left everything behind. My clothes, her picture, everything but the necklace she gave me. I still wear it. William's eyes flicked briefly toward the small, silver chain resting against her collarbone. In the city, she went on, I found a job at a cafe. I thought things were finally going to be okay. But a week later, the register came up short, and they said I had stolen the money. I hadn't. I swear I hadn't. But no one believed me. She gave a weak laugh, the kind that wasn't really laughter. They fired me on the spot. I didn't even fight back. I just left. She looked at him, then, and he saw the exhaustion behind her youth, the same kind of quiet defeat he'd once seen in the mirror. That's how I ended up here, she said, answering an ad that looked too good to be real. I guess I was right. The attempt at humor faded almost immediately. William's throat tightened. He had treated hundreds of patients, watched countless hearts stop and start again under his hands. But nothing had prepared him for this. The sight of a young woman carrying a lifetime of pain behind eyes that still managed to hold light. He spoke softly, his voice rough. You're stronger than you think, Megan. Most people would have broken long ago. She shook her head. No, I just survived. There's a difference. Their eyes met across the room. For the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt shared, like a wound they both recognized but no longer had to hide. Somewhere beyond the walls, the tide changed direction, carrying the moonlight back toward the shore. Inside that quiet room, two strangers, each carrying the ruins of another life, found the faint beginning of something whole again. The weather had turned warmer. But the air inside the Hayes mansion felt colder than ever. Days had passed since that night of confessions, and though neither Megan nor William spoke of what had been shared, something subtle had shifted between them. He began asking for her to read longer in the afternoons. Sometimes. He even smiled, small, careful smiles that felt like a secret. When she wheeled him out onto the terrace to watch the sea, he'd point to the horizon and say, almost to himself, there's something peaceful about distance. It doesn't demand anything. For the first time in months, there was life in his voice, and that inevitably was what Vivian noticed. It started with the way she watched them, quietly from the doorway, arms folded, eyes narrow. She had a talent for silence that wasn't absence but calculation. When she entered a room, the air changed. Even the ocean seemed to draw back from her. That morning, Megan was helping William adjust a blanket when Vivian appeared, heels clicking against the marble like a countdown. Well, she said, her tone light but sharp, someone's in unusually good spirits. She walked to the window, pretending to admire the view. What's the secret, William? Did the sun finally decide to shine just for you? William didn't answer. Vivian turned toward Megan, her smile thin. Or maybe it's something else. The new caregiver, perhaps? You seem awfully comfortable, Miss Carter. Megan froze. I'm just doing my job, Mrs. Hayes. Oh, please, Vivian drawled. Don't be modest. You must be very special to make him look that content. You've been reading to him, haven't you? Feeding him? Keeping him company while I'm gone. Because you're gone most of the time, William said quietly. His voice was calm, but each word landed like a strike. Vivian's head snapped toward him, eyes flashing. Excuse me. I said you're gone, he repeated, gaze steady. You leave him. She cut him off, laughing. A sound like broken glass. Oh, don't lecture me about devotion, darling. You gave up the right to judge me the moment you stopped being useful. The words hung in the air, cruel and deliberate. Megan's hands tightened around the back of the wheelchair. Vivian turned her attention back to the girl. As for you, sweetheart, I think your little act has gone on long enough. I don't need you filling this house with pity. Megan's throat went dry. Are you firing me? Vivian smiled, a perfect, practiced smile. I'm giving you a chance to find something more appropriate. You can finish today, pack your things, and leave tomorrow morning. William's jaw tensed. Vivian, stop this. She faced him, eyes bright with venom. Why? So you can keep playing the tragic hero while your charity case stares at you like you're some fallen saint? It's pathetic. Vivian, he warned, voice rising for the first time in weeks. No, William, she snapped, leaning closer. What's pathetic is you pretending this little servant girl makes you feel alive again. She doesn't love you. She feels sorry for you. And you, of all people, should know the difference. The room went silent except for the ticking of the clock on the mantel. Megan's eyes burned, but she refused to let the tears fall in front of her. She turned to William. It's okay, she whispered. Really, it's her house. Vivian's smirk widened, satisfied. At least the girl knows her place. Without another word, Megan wheeled William back toward his window, her movements quiet, measured. Vivian's heels clicked away down the hall. Later, alone in the kitchen, Megan let the tears come. They fell silently, landing on her hands as she sliced vegetables. She wasn't crying for herself, but for the man upstairs, trapped in a life he didn't deserve. When the soup began to simmer, she wiped her cheeks and whispered, One last dinner, then I'll go. Above her, the waves beat against the cliffs, steady and relentless, like a warning of what was coming. The house had gone still again, but this time the silence wasn't peace. It was the kind that comes just before the storm. Night settled thick and heavy over the mansion, the kind of silence that made every creak in the walls sound like a whisper. The ocean outside was restless, crashing against the cliffs with a steady rhythm. Megan sat in the kitchen, staring at the small bowl of soup she'd made hours earlier. She couldn't bring herself to eat it. Her suitcase was packed. Tomorrow morning, she'd be gone. Upstairs, the faint sound of a clock chimed 10 times. She stood, took a breath, and decided to check on William one last time. His room was dimly lit, the curtains drawn tight against the stormy night. William was sitting by the window, a blanket over his legs, eyes distant. He turned slightly when she entered. You're still here, he said softly. I wanted to make sure you were all right before I left, she replied. He gave a small nod. Vivian's already asleep, I assume? Yes. Good, he said, almost under his breath. That means peace. For a few hours at least. She smiled faintly and moved closer to adjust the blanket. But as she leaned in, something in his face changed. His hand went suddenly to his chest. The next moment, his body tensed. Dr. Hayes? He didn't answer. His breathing grew ragged, shallow. His eyes widened in panic as his hand clutched harder at his chest. William, she cried, dropping to her knees beside him. Years of watching her mother work in clinics kicked in instantly. Megan didn't think, she acted. She laid him flat in the chair, tilted his head, checked his pulse. It was faint, erratic. She pressed her palms over his sternum and began chest compressions, counting steadily under her breath. Come on. Come on. The monitor beside the bed flickered weakly, beeping in uneven intervals. She moved between compressions and breaths, keeping her voice steady despite the terror crawling up her throat. After what felt like an eternity, his body jerked faintly. He coughed, gasping for air. Relief flooded her so quickly she almost sobbed. It's okay, she whispered. You're all right now. But as she leaned closer, the lamplight caught on something at her collarbone, her necklace slipping free from beneath her shirt. The small silver pendant glinted in the dim light. William's gaze locked on it. His hand, still trembling, reached out. That necklace, he rasped. Megan froze. What? He pointed weakly. Where? Did you get that? She touched the pendant, confused. It was my mother's. She gave it to me before she died. William's voice shook. What was her name? Anna, Megan whispered. Anna Carter. For a second, the world stopped moving. William's eyes widened as if struck by lightning. His breath hitched. Tears welled up and spilled freely down his cheeks. Anna, His voice broke into a hoarse cry. "Dear God!" Megan's heart pounded. "You knew her!" He reached for her hand, gripping it with a strength she didn't expect. "Knew her!" he repeated, almost laughing through the sobs. She was my life, my everything. And you—" "Megan," his voice cracked again. "You're my daughter." Her breath caught. "What?" "You are my child," he whispered, trembling. "Anna was pregnant when they took her from me. I searched for her, for you, for years." His voice dissolved into tears. "And you were here all this time." Megan's mind reeled. The room seemed to blur. Then she dropped to her knees beside him, clutching his hands to her chest. "You're my father?" He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "My little girl, my Anna's child." The weight of the years, every loss, every unanswered question, collapsed between them. Megan buried her face against his chest, her sobs mingling with his. "I thought I lost both of you," he whispered, "but you came back to me." For a long moment neither spoke. The storm outside raged on, but inside that room, something sacred had broken open. Two lives, once torn apart by cruelty and chance, had finally found their way back to each other. Megan lifted her head, her voice barely audible. "I saved your life tonight." He smiled through tears. "No, sweetheart," he said softly. "You gave it back to me." Outside, lightning flashed across the horizon, illuminating the sea in brief. Blinding light, as if the universe itself bore witness to their reunion. Morning crept in quietly, the pale light of dawn spilling across the marble floors of the mansion. The sea beyond the windows was calm for the first time in days, as if even the ocean was holding its breath. Megan sat beside William's bed, still shaken from the night before, her fingers tracing the outline of the pendant that had changed everything. Neither of them had slept. They didn't need to. The truth had filled every silence, every heartbeat between them. When the first rays of sunlight touched the curtains, William spoke in a low, unsteady voice. "You should leave, Megan, before she wakes up. Vivian will. She'll never let this go." Megan shook her head. "I'm not leaving you here." He looked at her, the old fear flickering behind his eyes. "You don't understand what she's capable of. She controls everything, the accounts, the staff, even the car keys. I can't walk." "I'm not helpless," Megan interrupted, her voice steady but soft. "You're my father, and you're coming with me." For a long moment he just stared at her, torn between disbelief and the fragile hope he'd forgotten how to feel. Then he nodded slowly. "All right, but we must be careful." They waited. The house woke in small sounds. The distant hum of the refrigerator, the low groan of pipes, the faint creak of Vivian's heels as she moved down the hall. She left around 9, perfume trailing behind her like smoke. The slam of the front door echoed through the quiet corridors. That was their moment. Megan moved quickly, but without panic. She packed only what mattered, his medication, some clothes, the few photos from his desk, and a small leather-bound journal. William watched her, his hands trembling slightly as he tried to help. Every sound seemed amplified. The zip of the suitcase, the wheels of his chair rolling over the tile, the ticking of the grandfather clock in the foyer. When the taxi finally pulled into the driveway, its yellow roof light blinking faintly through the fog, William hesitated. His eyes drifted toward the staircase, toward the life that had once been his. The hall smelled faintly of her perfume still. He let out a shaky breath. "Are you ready?" Megan asked. He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time the answer was easy. "Yes, let's go home." She helped him into the chair, wheeled him across the threshold and out into the gray morning. The sea breeze hit their faces, cool and alive. The taxi driver, a kind middle-aged man, jumped out to help load the chair. No one in the house stirred. By the time Vivian returned, there would be nothing left but silence and a half-empty room. The drive into town was quiet. William watched the coastline slip by, each turn of the road pulling him farther from the years of control, resentment, and fear. When the taxi finally stopped in front of Megan's small apartment building, sunlight had begun to break through the clouds. The apartment was modest, a single living room, a tiny kitchen, the faint smell of coffee and soap. Megan opened the curtains wide, letting the light pour in. William looked around slowly, then back at her. "It's small," he said with a faint, almost wistful smile, "but it feels real." "It's yours now, too," she said. He wheeled closer to the window, the morning sun touching his face. Outside, the city stirred to life, the sound of children on bicycles, the distant bark of a dog, the promise of an ordinary day. For the first time in years, William Hayes felt air fill his lungs without pain. The light on his skin wasn't the glare of hospital lamps or the hollow glow of wealth. It was freedom. Megan stood beside him, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. The morning had already said it all. Their old lives were over, and a new one, fragile but real, had just begun. Spring came quietly to Fairfield, washing the city in pale sunlight and the soft scent of blooming dogwoods. Months had passed since the night Megan and William escaped the mansion, and in that time their world had changed in ways neither could have imagined. The small apartment had grown into a sanctuary, a place where laughter began to replace silence, and where the ticking clock no longer sounded like a countdown, but like a heartbeat. William had regained some strength. The doctors were astonished by his recovery. The routine of physical therapy, morning walks in the courtyard, and Megan's constant presence had brought color back to his face. For the first time in years, he looked alive. One afternoon, as Megan helped him through his exercises at a rehabilitation center, a tall man with gray-streaked hair and an easy smile entered the room. His sharp suit contrasted with the relaxed warmth in his eyes. He stopped mid-step, staring at William in disbelief. "Dr. Hayes?" William turned, blinking in surprise. "Andrew Sinclair." Andrew broke into a grin. "It is you. I'd heard rumors you'd retired, but my God, it's been, 10 years? You operated on me at Yale. Saved my life." William chuckled, shaking his hand. "You look well enough to prove it." Andrew glanced toward Megan, who was quietly folding a towel nearby. "And who's this?" "My daughter," William said simply, pride slipping into his tone. "Megan Carter." Something in Andrew's expression softened. He extended his hand to her. "It's a pleasure, Megan. Your father's a legend, you know. I owe him a great deal." She smiled shyly. "Then I suppose I should thank you for coming back healthy." The three of them talked for nearly an hour, the conversation easy, filled with the kind of laughter that hadn't touched William's life in far too long. Before leaving, Andrew turned to him. "You ever think about going back to work, Doctor? Not in a hospital. Something smaller, your own practice maybe? I could help with that." William hesitated, the old spark flickering in his eyes. "A clinic." "Exactly," Andrew said. "Private, quiet. The kind of place where people still believe in healing, not paperwork." Within weeks, the plan became reality. Andrew handled the legal side, Megan took over organization, and William poured himself into the work like a man reborn. By early summer, Hayes Heart Clinic opened its doors on a quiet street near the harbor. Patients came steadily, former colleagues, townspeople, families who remembered the surgeon who once gave them hope. Megan managed appointments, greeted patients, and filled the waiting room with fresh flowers every Monday morning. Her calm efficiency balanced William's quiet authority perfectly. Together, they built not just a clinic, but a second chance at life. Andrew visited often, at first to check on the business, then simply because he wanted to. He brought coffee for Megan, fresh books for William, and conversation that lingered long after he left. Slowly, Almost imperceptibly, something gentle began to grow between him and Megan. Shared smiles, late evenings of laughter as they closed the clinic together, long walks along the harbor after work. William noticed, of course, one evening, as he watched them from his office window, Megan laughing, Andrew leaning in to listen. He felt no ache, no sadness, only peace. When she returned inside, he said, quietly, "Your mother would have liked him." Megan smiled. "You think so?" "I know so," he replied. Outside, the last light of the day painted the harbor gold. For the first time in a lifetime, the future didn't feel uncertain, it felt earned. William Hayes had his purpose again, and his daughter had found love waiting at the edge of everything they'd rebuilt. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was living. Spring had returned to Fairfield, soft and golden, carrying the scent of magnolias through the streets. The years had moved gently for William Hayes, reshaping what had once been a broken life into something whole again. The sea breeze no longer carried memories of regret, it carried laughter. The clinic thrived, the city knew his name again, but now it was spoken with warmth rather than awe. That evening, he and Megan were heading downtown to meet Andrew and the girls at the local theater. The twins were performing in a school play, Tiny Bumblebees. Megan had said proudly on the phone that morning. William wore his best navy blazer, the one Megan insisted made him look distinguished. He had learned not to argue. The cab slowed at a red light near the harbor. Outside, under the flickering glow of a street lamp, a commotion stirred near a row of benches. A small group of people had gathered, 2 officers, a man in a cafe apron, and someone sitting slumped on the curb. At first, William didn't pay attention, but as the figure lifted her head, the lamplight revealed her face, pale and unrecognizable, framed by messy blonde hair streaked with gray. The years had not been kind. The woman mumbled something to the officers, her voice slurred, defiant even in defeat. Megan turned to look. "Dad, is that?" William's eyes softened, the recognition settling slowly, like dust on glass. Vivian. Her once elegant coat was torn at the sleeve. The diamonds she used to wear had been replaced by the glint of handcuffs. The police were helping her to her feet, but she stumbled, laughing bitterly at something only she could hear. The cafe owner shook his head. "Caught her trying to steal a wallet again," he said to one of the officers. For a moment, the world seemed to still. Years of memory flooded through William. The shouting, the control, the long nights of silence, but none of it held power anymore. He looked at her, not with anger, not even pity, but with something quieter. Megan whispered, "Should we?" He shook his head gently. "No, let her go." The taxi began to move as the light turned green. Through the window, the last thing they saw was Vivian being led away, her laughter fading into the sound of traffic. William leaned back, exhaling softly. "Every life," he said, "more to himself than to her, finds its balance in the end. We all pay the price we owe, no more, no less." Megan reached for his hand. "And you?" He smiled faintly. "I've already been paid in full." The theater came into view, a small brick building lined with fairy lights. Inside, the air was warm and filled with the gentle hum of families finding their seats. Andrew waved from the front row, holding 2 little girls in identical yellow costumes. When William entered, the twins broke free from their father's arms and ran to him, squealing, "Grandpa!" He bent down as they crashed into his legs, their tiny arms wrapping around him with fierce affection. He laughed, the sound deep and full, the kind of laugh that heals the parts of a man that time never could. After the play, they walked home under the fading evening light. Andrew carried one of the girls on his shoulders while Megan held the other's hand. William walked a few steps behind, watching them with quiet wonder. In front of their house, the twins raced ahead to the porch, their giggles echoing into the warm spring air. Megan turned, smiling. "You're quiet tonight." He nodded, gazing up at the stars just beginning to appear. Just thinking how strange life is, how it takes everything apart, only to give it back in a different way. Megan stepped closer and hugged him. The chain around her neck caught the last ray of sunlight, the same silver necklace that had once belonged to Anna Carter. It glimmered softly, like a promise kept across time. William touched the pendant, his hand steady. "Some lives," he murmured, "are stitched back together not by time, but by love that never stopped waiting." The breeze carried his words into the night as laughter floated from the porch. The ocean, somewhere beyond the houses, whispered against the shore, calm, forgiving, eternal. And for the first time in a lifetime, everything was exactly where it belonged.